Keanu Reeves walked in like an ordinary man, but they had no idea who he was. What happened next would change everything. Double asterisk. Keanu Reeves arrived in a city far from Hollywood, a place known more for its steel factories and roaring highways than for its connection to the film industry. The air was crisp with the scent of gasoline and asphalt, and the sun cast long shadows over the sprawling urban landscape. He had just wrapped up another exhausting day on set and needed something to reconnect with himself. Something familiar, something real. Dressed in a simple denim jacket, faded jeans, and a worn-out cap pulled low over his face, Keanu blended in with the crowd. To most, he looked like just another drifter, perhaps a blue-collar worker enjoying a rare day off, or a man simply wandering through town with no real destination. But Keanu had a purpose. His motorcycle, his trusted machine, was miles away in Los Angeles, and he felt its absence like an itch he couldn't scratch. He needed to ride. He needed the hum of an engine beneath him, the wind tearing through his thoughts, the thrill of the open road. That's when he saw it, a grand gleaming sign that read, Iron Legacy Motors. The dealership stood like a temple of steel and chrome, its glass windows reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. Inside, polished motorcycles stood on raised platforms, each bathed in dramatic lighting that made them look more like museum pieces than machines meant for the road. This was it. This was where he would find what he was looking for. As Keanu pushed open the heavy glass door, a soft chime echoed through the showroom. The inside was as extravagant as the exterior, black marble floors, sleek metallic fixtures, and the faint scent of polished leather. He took a slow breath, absorbing the ambiance, but before he could fully take it in, a voice, cold and clipped, interrupted him. "Good evening." The speaker was a man in his mid-40s, with slicked-back blonde hair and a navy blue suit so sharply pressed it could cut glass. His name tag read Franklin Baines, Senior Sales Executive. But the title might as well have been Gatekeeper of the Elite. Franklin's eyes swept over Keanu with the precision of a scanner, assessing, calculating, dismissing. Keanu, unfazed, nodded politely. "Hey there, I'm looking for a bike. Something classic, powerful, something that feels like freedom." Franklin's lips twitched in a smirk. "Ah, I see." His voice dripped with condescension. "Well, Iron Legacy Motors caters to a very particular clientele. We specialize in high-end, performance-driven models, machines that demand a certain level of, shall we say, commitment." He let the words hang in the air, as if testing whether Keanu would understand the unspoken message. "You don't belong here." Keanu tilted his head slightly, amusement flickering in his eyes. He had seen this act before, judgment wrapped in faux professionalism, superiority hidden behind a polished sales pitch. He played along. "Commitment, huh? That's exactly what I'm looking for." Franklin's smirk tightened. "Of course, though I should mention, these bikes require a significant investment. Perhaps I can show you something more, accessible?" Keanu exhaled slowly, keeping his patience intact. "Actually, I'd love to see your best models. Show me what you've got." Franklin hesitated, then, with an exaggerated sigh, gestured for Keanu to follow. The walk through the showroom felt more like an evaluation than a tour. Franklin moved with an air of superiority, his polished shoes clicking against the marble. Finally, they stopped in front of a Stratosphere X1, a top-of-the-line sport bike with a razor-sharp design and an engine that could rival a jet. "This," Franklin announced dramatically, "is the Stratosphere X1, one of the most exclusive motorcycles in existence. Its engine is a masterpiece, its acceleration unmatched. It's a bike for those who understand what true performance means." He turned slightly, eyeing Keanu with a smirk, as if waiting for him to admit he was in over his head. Keanu studied the machine with genuine appreciation, but shook his head. "Beautiful, but not what I'm looking for. I want something more classic, something that connects me to the road. Franklin barely concealed his disappointment. I see. Well, perhaps you'd prefer something more traditional. He led Keanu to a Titan Heritage 1500, a massive chrome-heavy cruiser that exuded raw power and history. This, Franklin said, tapping the leather seat, is the Titan Heritage 1500, an iconic machine. Rugged, reliable, not exactly flashy, but dependable. The way he said it made it clear this was the lesser option, the one Franklin felt was more appropriate for someone like Keanu. Keanu ran a hand over the handlebars, feeling the weight of the machine. It was powerful, sturdy, exactly what he wanted. This one has soul, Keanu murmured. Franklin chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. Soul, sure. But let's be clear, sir. This bike isn't for just anyone. We have strict policies about test drives. We don't simply hand over our motorcycles without, how should I put it, proper assurances. Keanu raised an eyebrow. Assurances? Franklin folded his arms, clearly relishing this moment. Yes. Experience, financial commitment, a certain profile. The last word hung heavy in the air. Franklin had no idea who he was talking to. He had no clue that the man standing before him had spent years mastering motorcycles in high-stakes action films, that Keanu Reeves was more at home on two wheels than most people were behind a desk. Keanu took a slow breath, steadying himself. He had walked into this store looking for a motorcycle, but now he was looking at something bigger. This wasn't just about a bike anymore. This was about the way people were judged, about how respect, or the lack of it, was often dictated by nothing more than an assumption. And Keanu Reeves was about to prove just how wrong assumptions could be. What happens next will leave Franklin rethinking everything he believes. But before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. Keanu examined the motorcycle carefully, his fingers tracing the curves of the metal, but he shook his head slightly. It's impressive, but not quite what I'm looking for. I need something timeless, something that speaks to the road, not just speed. Franklin Baines sighed, his impatience barely concealed. Right, perhaps something more modest is what you need. His tone made it clear. He didn't believe Keanu had the means or the knowledge to appreciate the finer machines. With exaggerated effort, Franklin led him toward a Titan Renegade 1400. A heavy cruiser with deep chrome accents and a presence that demanded respect. This, Franklin announced, is the Titan Renegade 1400, a decent machine, a bit old-fashioned but reliable. It's not the most prestigious model, but maybe it's more suited to what you're looking for. Keanu ran his hand along the handlebars, letting the feel of the machine settle into his bones. He smiled faintly. Now this has character. It has soul. Franklin's eyebrow twitched in surprise. If that's what you want, he said, barely masking his contempt, we can discuss a test ride. But I must warn you, our policies are quite strict. We don't just let anyone handle these bikes. He smirked, his words dripping with challenge. Without another word, Franklin turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Keanu in an uncomfortable limbo. The message was clear. This wasn't a process. It was a test. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity as Keanu stood beside the Titan Renegade 1400, examining every inch of it while keeping an eye on Franklin's movements. Eventually, the salesman returned, his expression even stiffer than before. He carried himself with the arrogance of a man who had just solidified his authority. "Sir," Franklin began, adjusting his cufflinks as if preparing for a performance, "I spoke with the manager, and unfortunately, we cannot authorize a test ride. Our policy is very clear on this." Keanu's expression barely changed, but his eyes darkened slightly. "And what exactly is this policy?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Franklin exhaled, exasperated. Only customers who meet specific criteria can test our bikes. That includes demonstrating the experience required to handle machines of this caliber. It's nothing personal, of course, just following protocol. Keanu nodded slowly, considering the words. I see. And how exactly do you determine experience? His voice carried an almost imperceptible edge now. Franklin forced a smile, but the condescension in his voice was unmistakable. Well, sir, with all due respect, these bikes aren't for everyone. The Titan Renegade 1400 isn't a toy. It requires a seasoned rider. I'm simply ensuring the safety of our vehicles. Keanu took a slow breath, suppressing the flicker of irritation creeping up his spine. I can assure you, he said smoothly, that I have the necessary experience. Franklin chuckled, shaking his head. Oh? And what kind of experience might that be? Weekend cruises? Perhaps a few scenic rides? The sneer in his voice was undeniable. Riding a Titan Renegade 1400 isn't just about looking the part. It requires true understanding. Keanu studied Franklin for a moment, then spoke with measured calm. I've ridden all kinds of motorcycles in all kinds of conditions. I don't believe handling this one will be an issue. But Franklin wasn't interested in listening. He shook his head again, as if Keanu's words were nothing more than empty boasts. I'm sorry, sir, but that's not enough. We have responsibilities to our vehicles and our clients. We can't just allow anyone to test such an exclusive bike without appropriate assurances. Keanu understood what was happening. This wasn't about policy. It was about perception. Franklin had already judged him, written him off as someone unworthy of their exclusive clientele. He took another breath, controlling the irritation threatening to surface. I'm not asking for special treatment, Keanu said, his voice steady. I'm asking for fairness. It's standard procedure, isn't it? Franklin hesitated, his composure slipping for a fraction of a second. Yes, sir, it is standard, but only under appropriate circumstances. My manager has given clear guidelines, and I intend to follow them. It's not personal. Keanu tilted his head slightly, studying the salesman. Are you sure about that? He asked softly. The question hung in the air, heavier than the rev of a high-powered engine. Franklin blinked, caught off guard by the directness. For a moment, Keanu considered walking away. He had no obligation to tolerate such treatment. But deep down, he knew. This was bigger than a motorcycle. This was about the way people are judged, and Keanu Reeves wasn't about to let that go unchallenged. Keanu Reeves crossed his arms, standing firm beside the Titan Renegade 1400 as the tension in the showroom thickened. Franklin Baines, the salesman, held his ground, but his once confident smirk had faded. The room had gone silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Employees had stopped pretending to work, and even customers now pretended to browse while sneaking glances at the brewing confrontation. I understand, Keanu said in a voice as steady as a mountain. But if you're going to follow these guidelines, I'd like to speak directly with the manager. I think he can clarify this policy better. The request was direct, and Franklin's face stiffened. He hadn't expected Keanu to challenge him so openly. The manager is very busy at the moment, Franklin replied quickly, his voice clipped, as if hoping to shut the conversation down. Keanu tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. That's fine. I'll wait. The words carried weight, and a ripple of murmurs spread through the showroom. Other employees exchanged glances, realizing that this was no ordinary customer, and certainly no ordinary dispute. Franklin shifted uncomfortably, but Keanu stepped forward, closing the space between them ever so slightly. Let me be direct, Keanu said, his voice quiet but sharp as a blade. Is this really about company policy, or is this about what you think of me? Franklin's eyes widened just slightly before he caught himself. Sir, he began, trying to regain control. As I said, it's not personal. We're simply following protocol. But Keanu had already noticed the hesitation in his voice, the way his hands fidgeted slightly at his sides. Franklin was faltering. Keanu remained beside the Titan Renegade 1400, his fingers idly tracing the handlebars. Across the showroom, a younger salesman, perhaps sensing the unease, shot Franklin a look that seemed to say, "Are you sure you want to keep pushing this?" Franklin ignored it. "Sir, as I have mentioned before," Franklin continued, trying to mask his irritation, "these motorcycles aren't for just anyone. They require a level of commitment and expertise." Keanu finally turned from the bike and looked at Franklin, his eyes sharp, unwavering. "And what exactly makes you believe I don't have that expertise?" Franklin let out a small chuckle, shaking his head as if the very question was ridiculous. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a condescending murmur. "With all due respect, sir, your appearance doesn't exactly scream seasoned rider. These motorcycles, especially the Titan Renegade 1400, aren't just about looking the part. They require a certain presence." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "A certain presence?" Franklin gave a small, dismissive shrug. "You understand. Our clientele tend to be individuals of prestige and exclusivity. Riding isn't just about the machine. It's about representing a lifestyle." For a moment, Keanu said nothing, letting the words sink into the air around them. Then, with deliberate slowness, he replied, "And what exactly makes you think I wouldn't represent this motorcycle?" Franklin faltered, the question catching him off guard. He forced another smirk, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "Well, let's see," he said, glancing at Keanu's worn-out cap, his simple clothes, his casual stance. "You came in here asking about rentals. That's not something our usual customers do. Our buyers come in knowing exactly what they want. No hesitation, and let's just say—" He paused, scanning Keanu once again. "Your style is a bit more casual than our typical clients." A few gasps from onlookers echoed through the room. Even some of the employees seemed visibly uncomfortable. An older man near a Triumph motorcycle crossed his arms and shook his head disapprovingly, while a woman near the back whispered something to her husband. Keanu inhaled deeply, controlling the simmering irritation beneath his otherwise composed expression. He had seen this countless times before, judgment wrapped in polite words, prejudice hidden behind professional smiles. "So, you're saying," Keanu said slowly, "that I don't look like someone who can afford or handle this bike?" Franklin chuckled, now barely trying to hide his amusement. "Don't take it the wrong way, sir. I just believe this motorcycle requires a certain level of commitment, and from what I've seen, I'm not entirely convinced." The murmurs grew louder. More customers had stopped to listen, their curiosity now turning into something more. Frustration, disbelief. Keanu stepped forward, meeting Franklin's gaze. His voice remained low, but there was no mistaking the weight behind it. "Don't you think you're being a bit quick to judge someone you've just met?" Franklin hesitated for the briefest of moments, but then he straightened his tie, regaining his condescending posture. "Sir, I'm not judging. I'm simply doing my job and protecting the interests of this dealership. After all, it's my duty to ensure our motorcycles are in the right hands." Keanu let out a soft, humorless chuckle. "The right hands," he repeated. The words tasted bitter. He took another look around the showroom, his gaze passing over the employees, the customers, the gleaming motorcycles that Franklin seemed to think he was unworthy of. And in that moment, Keanu Reeves made a decision. He wasn't just going to challenge Franklin, he was going to prove him wrong. Keanu let out a slight chuckle, humorless. "The right hands. Interesting. He stepped away from the Titan Renegade 1400 and crossed his arms as if sizing up the salesman. "Don't you think that before drawing conclusions, you should at least give me a fair chance to prove my ability?" Franklin Baines swallowed hard, but his pride did not allow him to back down. "Sir, these motorcycles are not toys, and a test ride isn't something we just hand out to anyone, especially when there's no guarantee that the client can, in fact, purchase the vehicle." The silence that followed was almost suffocating. Keanu stared at Franklin for a long moment without looking away. His gaze was unwavering, cool, assessing. Finally he spoke, his tone steady and cutting through the tension like a blade. "And what exactly makes you believe I can't buy this motorcycle?" Franklin tried to mask his unease by adjusting his tie again. He took a step back, but still tried to maintain dominance over the conversation. "Well, don't take this the wrong way, but our customers usually exhibit a certain lifestyle that aligns with these machines. It's something that, with all due respect, doesn't seem to be your case." The sheer audacity of the statement caused a murmur to ripple through the showroom. An older man who had been watching from the side shook his head in clear disapproval. A younger couple whispered to each other, their expressions a mix of shock and discomfort. Keanu stepped forward, closing the space between him and Franklin. His voice remained calm, but there was an unmistakable firmness to it. "Let me ask you something, Franklin. Is all this resistance really about store policy, or is it about what you think of me?" Franklin's eyes widened, clearly caught off guard by the question. He attempted to regain his composure, but his rigid posture betrayed him. "Sir, as I've said, this isn't personal. We're just following our policies." "Policies that you seem to be interpreting your way," Keanu countered, still without raising his voice. "Because so far all you've given me are excuses." The tension had reached its breaking point. Every person in the showroom was now riveted to the confrontation, their collective focus resting solely on Franklin, who was visibly floundering. He opened his mouth as if to mount another defense, but before he could speak, a firm voice cut through the air. "What's going on here?" All eyes turned toward the front of the showroom as a man in his mid-50s strode toward them with purposeful steps. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back, his presence commanding. Dominic Shaw, store manager. Franklin's posture stiffened. "Mr. Shaw, I was just explaining our test drive policy to the customer. He insists on riding the bike, but—" Shaw held up a hand, silencing Franklin with nothing more than a glance. His eyes flicked to Keanu, assessing him, before settling into something resembling recognition. "Mr. Reeves, I'm Dominic Shaw, the manager here," he said, extending his hand. Keanu took it, noting the slight hesitation in Shaw's grip, the subtle shift in his demeanor. It was clear. Shaw had just realized who he was dealing with. Keanu met his gaze steadily. "Thank you for stepping in, Mr. Shaw. As I was explaining, I came in looking to purchase a motorcycle. But instead of discussing specs, the conversation turned into a question of whether I even deserve to be here." A hush fell over the room as Shaw's expression darkened. He turned his gaze to Franklin, who now looked like a man wishing he could vanish into thin air. "Is that so?" Shaw's voice was measured, but carried an unmistakable weight. Franklin shifted uncomfortably. I was simply ensuring that we adhere to our policies regarding test drives and clientele." His voice, previously dripping with arrogance, had lost its certainty. Shaw let the words hang for a moment before nodding slowly. "Mr. Reeves, I apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced. That is not how we operate here." Franklin's jaw tensed, but he didn't dare interject. The employees who had been watching from the background exchanged knowing glances. Shaw turned to one of the junior sales associates. "Have the Titan Renegade 1400 prepped for a test drive immediately." Keanu didn't break eye contact with Franklin as the order was given. He could see the embarrassment creeping into the salesman's expression, the realization of just how badly he had miscalculated. "I appreciate that, Mr. Shaw," Keanu finally said, "but understand, this isn't just about me. I could have walked away, but how many others have you turned away without realizing who they were, who they could be?" Shaw inhaled sharply, his gaze lingering on Keanu for a beat longer than necessary. "You're right," he admitted, the first sign of genuine acknowledgement in his voice. "And that's something we're going to fix." Franklin's face was now beet red, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Keanu gave him one last look, not of malice, but of silent understanding. And then, without another word, he turned toward the door where his test drive was waiting. The lesson had been delivered, and Iron Legacy Motors would never be the same again. Dominic Shaw listened attentively, the growing discomfort on his face evident, especially now that he fully grasped who Keanu was. The atmosphere in the showroom had shifted entirely. Customers and employees alike stood in hushed anticipation, watching how this would unfold. "This is not how we do business at Iron Legacy Motors," Shaw declared, his voice firm, his gaze landing on Franklin with unmistakable disapproval. "Our goal is to treat every customer with respect and fairness, regardless of their background, attire, or status." Franklin, who had been standing rigid, visibly flinched. He opened his mouth, perhaps to offer some hasty justification, but Shaw raised a hand, cutting him off. "Enough, Franklin. There's no excuse for how this was handled." Keanu, remaining composed, observed the exchange with measured calm. He had dealt with situations like this before, moments where a person's true character was laid bare in the face of accountability. Shaw turned to him, his expression sincere. "Mr. Reeves," Shaw said, his voice carrying both an apology and a resolution, "please allow me to personally correct this. You will have your test drive immediately, without further complications." Keanu nodded, offering a small yet appreciative smile. "I appreciate that, Mr. Shaw. It's reassuring to see leadership take responsibility and make things right." Shaw motioned to one of the junior sales associates. "Get the Titan Renegade 1400 prepped outside immediately." The employee scurried away, eager to distance himself from the tension Franklin had created. As Keanu followed Shaw toward the exit, he passed Franklin, who stood motionless, his face now a mixture of embarrassment and regret. Keanu paused briefly, meeting Franklin's gaze, not with hostility, but with something deeper. A silent acknowledgement, a lesson unspoken but understood. Outside, the crisp evening air greeted him as the Titan Renegade 1400 sat gleaming under the dealership's lights. An employee handed Keanu a helmet with a mixture of awe and hesitation. "Everything is ready for you, sir," he said, his tone carrying newfound respect. Keanu climbed onto the bike, feeling the familiar weight beneath him. He adjusted his grip, then turned to look at Shaw and Franklin one final time, a silent reminder of what had transpired, of the importance of treating others with decency and fairness. Then, with a smooth motion, he started the engine. The deep, powerful growl of the Titan Renegade 1400 filled the air, reverberating through the parking lot like a declaration. Keanu eased the bike forward, rolling onto the open road, leaving behind the tension of the showroom. As the city lights blurred in his peripheral vision, Keanu let the wind carry away the weight of the encounter. The open road stretched before him, each turn of the throttle bringing back the sense of freedom he had been missing. This was why he rode, not just for the machine, but for the connection, the escape, the unfiltered moments of clarity. Reflecting on the events of the day, Keanu knew it wasn't just about a test drive or a misunderstanding at a dealership. It was about something far more profound. The prejudice he faced wasn't unique. It was systemic, a symptom of a world that often judged worth based on appearance rather than essence. And today, he had forced at least one business to reconsider that approach. The road widened, opening up into a vast stretch of countryside. The scent of fresh grass mingled with the cool night air. Keanu let out a breath, allowing himself to simply be. This was his sanctuary, his peace. And as he rode into the distance, he couldn't help but wonder how many others had walked away from moments like the one at the showroom, feeling unseen, disrespected. Tonight, that cycle had been broken, and as Keanu Reeves accelerated into the horizon, he carried with him not just a victory, but a lesson, one that would hopefully echo beyond that showroom, beyond that city, into the very fabric of how people choose to see and treat one another. Keanu turned onto a winding country road, the Titan Renegade 1400 humming beneath him like a trusted companion. He rode through the dusk-lit highway until he spotted a rustic roadside diner glowing in the dimming light. A neon sign flickered above the entrance. Earl's Roadhouse, a small but lively establishment where the scent of coffee and grilled food drifted through the air. Pulling into the gravel parking lot, Keanu eased the bike to a stop near the entrance. He removed his helmet, shaking out his hair as he dismounted. As he did, a group of young men sitting near the diner's outdoor tables exchanged glances before one of them whispered something. "No way," one of them muttered. "Is that?" Keanu heard them but pretended not to notice as he approached the entrance. Another one of the young men, his excitement barely contained, finally spoke up. "Excuse me, are you Keanu Reeves?" Keanu turned, offering them a small smile. "Yeah, that's me." The group erupted in hushed excitement. One of them, wide-eyed, stammered, "Dude, we love your movies! John Wick, The Matrix, you're a legend!" Keanu chuckled softly, nodding in appreciation. "Thank you, that means a lot." "Man, you're just out here riding alone," another asked, bewildered. "Like a regular guy?" Keanu smirked. "I am a regular guy, just one who really loves motorcycles." The genuine humility in his tone caught them off guard. They scrambled to pull out their phones, asking for photos. Keanu obliged, shaking hands and exchanging a few words with each of them. Once the excitement settled, he stepped inside and ordered a simple black coffee. The warmth of the drink, coupled with the easygoing atmosphere, allowed him a moment to reflect on the day's events. He thought about Iron Legacy Motors, about Franklin, about the judgment he had faced. It wasn't just about him, it was about the hundreds of people who walked through those doors every day only to be sized up and dismissed based on nothing more than appearances. Maybe, Keanu thought, it was time for something to change. With that realization, he finished his coffee, nodded to the group outside, and climbed back onto the Titan Renegade 1400. The powerful roar of the engine cut through the night air as he rode back toward town, his mind made up. When he arrived back at Iron Legacy Motors, the atmosphere inside the showroom was tense. Dominic Shaw, the manager, stood near the front desk, waiting with an unreadable expression. Franklin, the arrogant salesman, lurked in the background, shifting uneasily. Employees and customers pretended to browse, but the air was thick with anticipation. Keanu removed his helmet and walked straight to Shaw. His movements were calm, but there was no mistaking the determination in his eyes. "I like the bike," he said simply, a slight smile playing at his lips. "But before we talk about any purchase, we need to discuss something more important." Shaw's brow furrowed, but he nodded. "Of course, Mr. Reeves, I'm listening." Keanu turned slightly, glancing toward Franklin, who immediately looked away. Then he met Shaw's gaze again. "I want to talk about the way customers are treated in this store." The room fell into near silence. Every employee, every customer within earshot was listening. "I could have been anyone today," Keanu continued, his voice calm but firm. "I could have been a first-time buyer, a kid saving up for his dream bike, or a veteran rider just looking for a new machine. But the moment I walked in, I was judged by my clothes, my questions, my presence, and I imagine I'm not the first." Shaw exhaled, glancing at Franklin, who stood frozen, his jaw clenched. He turned back to Keanu. "I won't deny it, Mr. Reeves. What happened today was unacceptable." Keanu nodded. "I'm not here for apologies," he said. "I want to see change. I want to know that from this day forward, every customer who walks through these doors is treated with respect, whether they're in a designer suit or a worn-out leather jacket." Shaw studied him for a long moment before he nodded. "You're right, and that's something we will change." He turned to the employees. "Starting today, we are implementing new policies to ensure every customer gets the treatment they deserve." The murmurs that followed weren't just from customers. They were from employees who had long witnessed similar incidents but never spoke up. Shaw turned back to Keanu. "And to start, Mr. Reeves, if you'd still like that test ride, the Titan Renegade 1400 is yours for the afternoon." Keanu gave a small smile, nodding. "I'd like that." As the bike was wheeled out onto the lot, Franklin remained rooted in place, his face a mixture of frustration and silent realization. He had been humbled, and he knew it. Keanu mounted the Titan Renegade 1400, feeling the weight of more than just the machine beneath him. As he started the engine, the deep rumble filled the lot. But before he pulled away, he glanced back at Shaw. "Change isn't just about policy," he said over the engine's roar. "It's about mindset." Then, with a smooth twist of the throttle, he rode out into the open road, knowing that today something had shifted. Not just for him, but for Iron Legacy Motors, and hopefully for every rider who came after him. Keanu took a few measured steps toward Dominic Shaw, gripping his helmet in one hand. His stance was relaxed, but there was a quiet intensity in his expression that made it clear he was about to say something important. "Mr. Reeves," Shaw began, forcing a smile as if trying to smooth over the tension, "I trust the Titan Renegade 1400 met your expectations? A stunning machine, isn't it?" Keanu nodded slowly. "It's an incredible motorcycle, but before I consider any purchase, there's something more pressing we need to talk about." Shaw's smile faltered slightly, but he nodded. "Of course, Mr. Reeves, we're here to address any concerns." Keanu inhaled deeply, then turned slightly so that his words were directed not just at Shaw, but at the entire showroom. His voice, calm yet commanding, cut through the uneasy silence. "From the moment I walked in here, I was judged, not by my knowledge of motorcycles, not by my experience, but by my appearance." Shaw's expression grew more rigid. Meanwhile, Franklin Baines, the arrogant salesman, stood at the back, visibly uncomfortable. His hands twitched at his sides, and he seemed to be debating whether to interject or shrink into the background. "I understand the need for policies," Keanu continued, his gaze now locking onto Franklin. "I understand that a business has to maintain a level of security, that you don't just let anyone test drive these machines without some assurances. But let's be clear, this wasn't about policy. It was about prejudice. And that," Keanu's voice sharpened, "is unacceptable." Shaw exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. Franklin, whose confidence had dwindled to nothing, clenched his fists behind his back, eyes darting toward the nearest exit. Keanu raised a hand before Shaw could respond. "The bigger issue," he continued, now addressing everyone in the room, "isn't just what happened to me. It's what this represents. How many customers have walked in here excited about their dream bike only to be dismissed because they didn't look the part? How many people have walked out of here feeling humiliated when they should have left feeling inspired?" A murmur rippled through the crowd of employees and customers. Several employees exchanged glances, some nodding subtly in agreement. Shaw's shoulders sagged slightly. "Mr. Reeves," he said, struggling to maintain his composure, "let me begin by offering a formal apology. There's no excuse for any member of my team making you feel disrespected. I assure you this will be addressed internally." Keanu shook his head. "I'm not here for an apology. I don't want Franklin punished, and I don't want this swept under the rug with a "we'll do better" promise. I want real change." Shaw frowned slightly. "And what exactly do you propose?" Keanu crossed his arms, his stance now fully assertive. "I propose that you implement a training program for every employee, not just about customer service, but about empathy and respect. Teach your staff to see customers as people, not as stereotypes. And I want you to take this a step further. Make it public. Let people know that Iron Legacy Motors is taking a stand, that this store is committed to valuing every customer, no matter who they are." The room fell into complete silence. Employees fidgeted. Franklin paled. Even the customers had stopped pretending to browse. Shaw slowly rubbed his chin, deep in thought. Franklin, meanwhile, shifted uncomfortably, like a man who had just realized his actions had consequences far beyond his control. "I see your point," Shaw said finally, his voice slower, measured. "I'll admit I never thought of this as a broader issue. We've been operating the same way for years, and yes, changing that approach could be challenging." Keanu gave a small, knowing smile. "The real risk," he said, "is changing nothing. You have the chance to make Iron Legacy Motors a leader in something bigger than just sales. You have the chance to prove that a business can be profitable while also treating people with dignity." Shaw studied Keanu carefully. He could feel the weight of the moment, the way every eye in the room was waiting for his response. Finally, he nodded. "Mr. Reeves," he said, extending a hand, "you've given me a lot to think about. And you're right. Change is necessary. I'll personally ensure that we implement your proposal." Keanu shook Shaw's hand firmly. The tension in the room finally eased, and a quiet hum of approval spread through the employees. Franklin looked as though he wished the ground would swallow him whole. Keanu turned toward the exit, but before leaving, he glanced back. "I look forward to seeing how Iron Legacy Motors transforms," he said. "And trust me, I won't be the only one watching." As Keanu stepped outside, the crisp air greeted him. He climbed onto the Titan Renegade 1400, started the engine, and let the deep rumble fill the lot. The road stretched before him, endless and free. And as he rode off, he knew that today, something more than just an engine had roared to life. Change had begun. Dominic Shaw remained silent, his gaze shifting from Franklin Baines to the employees who now stood in hushed anticipation. He understood that this was no longer just about a single incident. It was a pivotal moment that could define the future of Iron Legacy Motors. Finally, he exhaled and nodded. "Mr. Reeves, you're absolutely right. This is something we need to fix. And if it means changing how we operate, improving our reputation, and earning back the trust of every customer, then it's a challenge worth accepting." Shaw took a firm step forward and extended his hand to Keanu. "I accept your proposal. Starting today, we will implement these changes. I will personally ensure my team understands the importance of treating every customer with respect. We will make this dealership a place where anyone feels valued." Keanu grasped Shaw's hand in a firm handshake, finally allowing a slight smile. "I appreciate that, Mr. Shaw. Change starts with leadership." Shaw turned to face his employees, his expression now filled with conviction. "From this moment on, Iron Legacy Motors will be different. We will redefine our standards, not just in business, but in how we treat people." At the back of the store, Franklin Baines stood frozen, his face flushed. He avoided Keanu's gaze, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like an anvil. Shaw met Franklin's eyes, his tone firm but measured. "Franklin, we will be having a serious conversation about your actions today. This does not align with who we are or who we need to be." Keanu cast a brief glance at Franklin, but chose not to say anything. He knew the salesman had a lot to reflect on, and in the end, the lesson had already been delivered. As Keanu walked out, the air in the showroom felt different. The tension had been replaced by something else: awareness, a shift in perception. Customers and employees who had once watched in silence now exchanged quiet nods of approval. A few even began to clap, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. Some smiled genuinely, others seemed relieved that something real had changed within the store that day. Keanu placed his helmet on, swinging his leg over the Titan Renegade 1400. With one smooth motion, he started the engine. The low, thunderous growl echoed across the lot as he took one final glance at the store. He gave a small, respectful wave to those watching before twisting the throttle and rolling out onto the open road. The wind whipped against his face as he rode, but the real movement wasn't in the speed. It was in the transformation he had just witnessed. This wasn't just about purchasing a motorcycle. This was about shifting mindsets, about challenging a system of judgment built on shallow assumptions. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Keanu reflected on what had transpired. He knew that moments like these, seemingly small but deeply significant, had the power to inspire real change. And as the road stretched endlessly before him, he couldn't help but wonder how many other places still needed someone to challenge the way things had always been done. If you enjoyed this story, stay with us for more stories of courage, kindness, and transformation. Click the screen to explore more stories of hope and resilience. The story of Keanu Reeves at Iron Legacy Motors teaches a powerful lesson about judgment, humility, and fairness. Too often, people are judged by appearances rather than character or ability, leading to missed opportunities and unfair treatment. This applies to everyday life, whether in business, relationships, or simple interactions. Respect should never be based on wealth, attire, or status, but on human decency. True leadership, like that of Dominic Shaw, means recognizing mistakes and creating real change. Whether you're in a position of power or just an observer, always challenge bias, stand up for fairness, and treat everyone with genuine respect. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe True Tapes channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you.